Welcome back to another free tutorial on pastel. My name's Avon Waters, and today I'm going to take you through a painting that started with no source and how to develop a painting when only you have a vague idea of what's going to happen. I got this idea from seeing the opening of film, and the film used a straight line and a close-up of the ink on a piece of paper. It reminded me of our flatlands in the Midwest. And so I'm going to show you how I developed from that initial idea some sketches. Here are the sketches that I did based on my memory of seeing that. And then I'm going to show you how I narrowed that down and I chose this one particular sketch to draw from to do a painting study, a color study. And here's the color study that I did after I selected this painting for the sketch. As you can see, it's much foggier than the finished product that we're headed towards. The finished picture turned out very different. That sometimes happens. If you let the painting show you what direction it's going to go, and you just are free to move about and do things differently than what's in front of you. Be sure to hit the like button so other people will see this. It really helps others see what you're enjoying now. So let's get started. Here's my setup. As you can see, I've put the color study in the sketch above. I'm using a UArt sanded 12 by 18. And I like to always start by putting and marking out my 1/3 intersects and break it up into the 1/3 area so I kind of stay away from centering a subject. I like to put a band of a little brighter area in some of my paintings, so I've put some place markers there on the 1/3 intersect. I don't always use a straight edge, but Scottish pastelist, very famous Scottish pastelist Tony Allan, he used this to keep track of his horizon as he started to block things in. So here I'm blocking in and trying to use my memory to get the idea of that line that I saw that prompted me into doing this particular painting to begin with. I just block in the colors. I'm just putting some color and pigment down so that when I add the wet pastel can pick those colors up and I can do a little blending. I'm going to be using Liquitex clear gesso. It has a pumice in it, so that will mix with these basic colors that I've added, and I'll use my little chip brush that has it's all frayed at the end, so I get these nice little brush strokes, and you can see the gesso is very thick, and so it will leave nice gesso marks. I always try to start with the lightest lights. In this case, those place setter kind of yellows, which will eventually turn into a yellow-orange, but be a little bit lighter than the other oranges in the sky and in the ground area. So I work my way from the lightest light to the middle tones and then to the darks, and I try to join the two together. Once it liquefies that pastel, and it being gesso, you can move it around quite a bit. You don't have to wait for it to dry before you go into the next. And I'll pick up some of these darker colors and mix things in. So this is something that if you haven't tried it before, I liquefy the gesso a little bit and I make sure it will string out. That foreground could be a field, it could be a grass, it could be a meadow, it could turn into corn stalks. And so I'm trying to use the end of a brush to simulate some of those high areas. And you'll see later on in the video how the high ridges will be used to create some really interesting things that I could not do otherwise. By mixing this up and using the end of a brush, I am keeping in mind that I'm trying to point towards some of the lighter areas, but I swirl things around and I try to make them a little bit more the random like nature might be, which this really helps if you're into wet pastel and you want to learn how to use textures. It is a little bit more advanced and it takes a little bit more patience, but maybe if you're starting out, just try it in a little bit of an area where you might have some grasses or some down tree limbs. Now there I wipe away some of the splatters I get because I don't want a big round dot in the sky or into those background areas. So you've got to wipe some of that down. Now I'm going to use hard molding paste. It's by Golden. It doesn't matter whether it's Golden or another hard modeling paste, but this does not have pumice in it. So you notice I've got all that heavy texture in the foreground. Well, the sky, all it has is brush marks, and I like to put this on in areas where I'm going to have edges of clouds or a lighter area of the sky. I think this comes from my having been an oil painter and worked a little bit with acrylic paints too, is that the highlights always seem to have an impasto, and this allows me to put it on with a palette knife and create some even heavier textures in some of those areas that will have a little bit more, or I anticipate that will have a little bit more brighter color in it. And there's a little bit there you saw me put in. Typically in the Midwest we have these lines of trees, and there's always a field behind one line of trees as you go off into the distance across a couple fields. So I want to put a little bit of that in. You'll see me later put in some highlights to signify that field. But after this is all done and after it's all dry, both the foreground texture and this modeling paste, you have to coat that again with clear gesso before you can start adding pastel like you see I'm doing here. The point at this, we've got it all washed in now. We've added our textures. We've got our sky textures. We've got our foreground textures. And we just have place setter colors that mixed with that gesso, so you can see now we can go back in and we can start adding dry pastel and start balancing out and figuring out where the values are going to make transitions from light and dark values to bright values to middle tone values. And we'll start coordinating the color combinations of our palette, those oranges and red oranges with some of those blues and red violets that will be in the shadows and the darker objects. And at this particular point we want to start detailing, or we're taking the painting more towards the middle stage of the painting process. We've got to get everything covered, and then we've got to start blending in. You'll see how that texture is really holding the paint or the pastel from going in the cracks. That's why I opted to use this roller. And I've got different size rollers, but what this roller does is this roller will press that powdered dry pastel into those areas that just washing it across or dragging it across will not get into. And it also does blending. Now there's different ways that you can blend your painting together. You could use a brayer on all parts of it, or you could use your brayer on part of it and use your fingers on another, or you could use pipe insulation or those peanuts that packing peanuts that often are used in the shipping process. So we get it all washed in with the different layers, and then we're entering the final stages where we want to just whisper over some of those areas. We're not pressing hard, we're controlling the pressure, and we're not pressing hard into the piece because we've already incorporated different layers of that dry pastel with the brayer, pipe insulation, or our fingers to blend it into. So we're whispering over In oil painting and acrylics, this is often called scumbling, but we're just light pressure taking the different colors that we want for shadows and highlights, and we're just very lightly dragging across some of those very textured areas to create more interest. If we weren't using texture, what we would be doing is we would be using mark making. The mark making is what is done to create texture when you are not using textured wet techniques like I'm using here. So to finish the painting, we start to accentuate where the layers of branches and leaves and trees might be. We start to bring that foreground, that composition, kind of a Z composition shape into the painting, and we start to try to balance the sky colors and the mid colors and the lights and the darks. And you can see I'm now adding just a little bit of rim light where the morning light might hit some wisp of rising fog or dew. You can see we ended up with a lot different from our color study and our sketch, but that's okay. When we're dealing with memory pieces, as long as we allow the piece to kind of tell us where it wants to go. Now, you can see there I firmed up that kind of Z line going to the right, and then the tree line brings the eye back to the left, and I've added in some highlights in that back field that you would see through those trees. Ultimately, I decided I did not like that Z line, and I changed it. So here's a close-up of the textures, and you can see how the scumbling over or the whispering over catches some of the light. And remember, I was saying how I would not be able to draw individual stems as fine as this, as particularly with pastel, unless you got a pastel pencil out or use a straight edge or some other tool. So by adding that swirls of paint and gesso, you can use house paint. I've used house paint in the bottoms of these things too, but just by following some of those lines, you're able to put in a lot more interest and simulate what a field might be that had sticks or grass in it. So that texture there is very important to help you do those things. And we'll firm up some of that field in the background and start to adjust some of these colors as we near the finished piece. And adding different colors, or I should say adding hues that are part of the same family, will add interest too. So what you start out with your wash and your middle process, you're gradually adding more interest by adding more hues to that. In the finished painting, I replaced the Z with a radial composition going to the highlight. Well, as you can see from the sketch and from the color study, I kept some of the oranges, but I incorporated some blues. From the start of this to the end of this, we had a lot of sunsets and pretty skies, and I had looked at some other artists' work that I loved the color palette that they used on the sunset. So I adapted some different things as I went along. That's the beauty of when you have just an idea and you're not a slave to what's in front of you, whether it's a photograph or whether it's a detailed drawing or working in plein air. So I hope you got something out of this, and if you're liking these free tutorials so I can keep doing this, please hit the subscribe button. At least hit the like button so others can see this more readily. All right, until next time, happy painting, be happy, enjoy life, and by all means, enjoy what you do. Enjoy painting. So long.